Bonjour tout le monde! This is We in France. I'm Diane, and before moving to France was even on my radar, I took classes at the Alliance Française 1 day a week just for fun. And then after I was accepted to the TAPIF program, teaching assistant in France, moving to France had become a reality. And at the time, my level of French was about B1 on paper, and I felt like I had a good intermediate foundation under my belt, but I was wrong. Once I arrived in France, I realized my language comprehension was pitiful. When I was actually face-to-face with a French person and conversing in real-life French, I had one heck of a time making it through just a regular conversation and catching barely half of what was being said. It certainly was not the same as a comfortable classroom setting. I had a lot to learn. I learned right away that there were a bunch of things that I could have done before my move and in the years following that would have better prepared me and helped me to excel in French a lot more quickly. So I want to get right into these 5 things that I did while learning French that held me back, and I don't want the same for you. So maybe you can learn from my mistakes. All right, first, let me kick this off by saying I will always be learning French. It's not a one and done thing. It's an ongoing process, and there is always more to learn. That said, there are definitely things I did in the early days as a beginner, as someone just coming to France, that held me back. Number 1 being not focusing on comprehension and actual conversation. Once I knew I was moving to France, I should have prioritized comprehension and actual speaking, because talking to French people is what I'd be doing a lot of. I'm not going to be sitting there reading the newspaper when I need to ask someone a question, or practicing grammar when I need to be communicating at the market or in a store somewhere. Instead, in French classes, listening comprehension and conversation practice was one in a controlled environment and only one piece of what we were learning in our curriculum in class. It wasn't the focus. So when I came to France, people had no trouble understanding me. I was perfectly understandable, but for the life of me, I couldn't understand people's replies coming at me quickfire, in this jumbled French, and it gave me major anxiety. I would be afraid to talk to people because I'd feel kind of dumb, and I was like this adult, right? I'm not a kid, and I wasn't understanding what was being said to me. More on that in a second. But at the time, my written French was stronger than my spoken French, and I should have worked to have the opposite be true. It took me, I would say, a solid 2-ish years to get up to speed in that department. I think I did an entire video on why comprehension needs to be your focus if you're actually moving to France. So I'll link that here. And of course, depending on your work situation, your family life, your particular needs and efforts, 2 years might be long for you. It might be short. It might take you less or more time. All right, number 2, getting lost in the minutia. When you're actually in France and speaking to someone, no one's going to care if you get the article of the word wrong. They're still going to understand you. They don't care if you flub your grammar. They need to make sure that they understand you. If you slightly mispronounce a word, they're mostly going to understand what you're trying to say. And the important thing here is that you're able to be understood and that you can understand others. No one's going to care if you can conjugate 100 verbs in the passé simple. If your speaking skills suck, it's great you have all that knowledge in your head and when you're writing and reading, but if you can't communicate in person, it's going to set you back. I wish I remember that back in the day. I would get so caught up on particular grammar rules or aspects of pronunciation, and then I'd go down that rabbit hole. I'll give you a stupid example. I remember going over the pronunciation of dog, chien, with annoying, chien, 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 chien. And I was caught up on that for hours, trying to differentiate the vowels. Stupid. In context, they know if you're saying the dog or if someone's annoying. They'll figure it out. None of that is actually important if you can't speak to real live human beings, unless, of course, your interest in French is more academic and not practical, and that's fine too. But for those of you actually coming to France, vacationing here, maybe starting a life here, know that your time can be best spent doing things that are going to actually serve you and be more useful here on the ground, and that will serve you in the future. So I wish I took my own advice on that. All right, along with that, number 3, being afraid of making mistakes. And you'll find out right away that as a language learner, you're going to make mistakes. I make them every day. That is a fact. And it's cute in a classroom setting when you're 15 years old with other high school students. But as a functional adult, it can be a major ego hit when you're nearly 30 and embarrassing yourself daily. And at various points throughout my first few years in France at my young age, I'd become so concerned with making mistakes that I wouldn't even want to try sometimes, honestly. I'd barely open my mouth. I'd let my husband Tom do all the talking, and that led to people assuming that I was shy or that I had nothing to say. Neither were true, right? When you keep messing up, it's easy to retreat and to just turn into yourself and not want to try anymore. And some days I still do. I hated French and I viewed it as the enemy, but all that does is hinder your progress. Making mistakes is part of the process. Like, I want to reassure you. So no matter your age, stand proud, do your thing, be confident, and you're only going to get better as you go. And that's amazing. All right, number 4, losing motivation. Now, once I got to a certain point and plateaued, I lost motivation to dig deeper and continue to up my level. I could do everything I needed to do in everyday life. Talk to my dog's vet, go to the doctor, communicate, and I was good enough. But contrary to popular belief, simply living in France, it's not going to lead to you speaking French perfectly. It's not osmosis. There is a lot of effort involved, and if you want to work on your grammar and all the little nuances, you can get there, but it doesn't magically happen. Sure, you'll be able to speak, but will you sound professional? Will you sound intelligent? No, you don't just absorb. You need to study. I'd find myself going through the same routine, having the same conversations about the same things with the same people, weather, the pharmacy, our dogs at the park, like the same routine. And that's not a recipe to actually improve. To push past that plateau, there's effort involved. So make that effort. And in particularly stressful times, studying French was the last thing that I had mental space for. I'm just being honest. But you can get your motivation back. I think I did a whole video on that. If not, I know I did a blog post, so I'll link it down below. All right, number 5, speaking English at home with Tom. If you have a foreign spouse who speaks the language of the country you live in, maybe you can relate. And in my case, Tom's level of English is always going to be higher than my level of French. It's just a fact. And because of that, early on in our relationship, we got into this habit, maybe a bad habit, of speaking to each other in English most of the time. So back in the day, as his level of English continued to improve, my level of French just kind of stayed the same. And I didn't force myself to work on it as much as I should have. I'm impatient. And maybe if I had been more strict with myself, more patient, and forced us to stay in French mode in the early days, I sure wouldn't be kicking myself now. Now, the good thing is it's never too late to change one's habits, and we're working on it. We've absolutely made an effort to speak more French at home, but old habits die hard, and it takes patience on both ends. So if your goal is to improve your language skills, don't fall into that easy habit of speaking the more dominant language. If you have that spouse or that partner that speaks the other language, make him or her speak it. Those early habits, they're definitely going to set the pace for future communication. And look at me, they're not so easy to change. So now that the things I did wrong are out of the way, I want to get into just a few things I did right, because there were some, and 2 stand out to me. The first is when I first arrived, I put myself out there. I socialized. I joined my neighborhood gym. I set up meetups with other people in my area. There's all kinds of meetup groups online you can find. And I even went to a Mormon church.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine.
And I'm not religious. In an attempt to meet others and speak French. So I did it all. And the other thing that I did right that's so important that you want to continue doing is to expose yourself to French daily. Do things like listen to podcasts. There's a true crime one I love. I'll put a screenshot on Les Voix du Crime, I think is the name, if you like true crime. It's not crazy difficult. Watch the news, do things like that, and you'll be surprised at how much you actually pick up. And if you want a bunch of tips to help prepare yourself for an upcoming trip to France in general, things like transportation, the currency, all kinds of things, the culture, I created a guide called 75 Beginner France Tips for a Standout Trip. It's just a few bucks, and I would love for you to check that out below. That way you'll be more prepared for your trip. As always, thank you so much for being here. If you got anything out of this video you could relate, or maybe you had a moment that's like, yeah, gotta watch out for that, I would love to hear it. I want to know that my content connects with you, that you get something from it. So talk to me in the comments. And with that, I'm going to leave it here. See you right back on We in France soon, everyone. Salut.